Hello, Manchester, Hooks at Auburn. It's the Progress Report because it's Wednesday at 7 o'clock and the two go together. Love and marriage go together like a horse and carriage. Well, I don't know. But the Wednesday at 7 o'clock and the Progress Report do go together. And we are expecting a very interesting guest to show up, and that's the guy I call my hero, State Representative Rennie Cushing, who is such a force in Concord. It's really amazing what he's achieved and what he's planning to achieve. But on this occasion, he's going to come in, he's going to talk about why he's sponsoring the bill to legalize cannabis in New Hampshire. We've already done the decriminalization. We've already done the medical authorization, to authorize some use of marijuana and provide for its dispense to treat medical conditions. Do we take the final step and just say, hey, your local marijuana dealer up to a certain amount, a small amount, you won't have to go to somebody who's dealing in the shadows. You can go to a legal dealer and get that. He thinks this is a good move. I don't. Mike Farley got him here and is getting him here, and we will have an interesting debate. And if you want to participate in that, of course.
A debate? Is that what we're going to have, Bob?
A divergence of views.
I thought we were going to put him up on a soapbox to espouse his views like we do for all our podcasts.
Well, we're going to do that, and I may want to challenge his views.
Well, in all fairness, I think I might have been a little challenging on the previous show we did.
Yeah, you were a little bit. And in any event, I think the show needs a little, occasionally contrasts, a little drama.
This really is a first, though, Bob. This whole series of conflict. I mean, aside from the presidential primary a few years back, we've really been of one mind, of one voice here.
Right.
I don't know. Could the band be breaking up? I don't know.
Well, wait and see how it goes, folks. That's just a tease. Meanwhile, my good friend Mike Farley, here he is, because it's Wednesday and it's not the first Wednesday of the month. And he's been doing things that I really enjoyed called the POTUS Report and the Progress Report. Well, he's decided that's a little stale and doesn't want to talk more about Trump, and I can kind of understand that.
Bob, it was getting real, it was wearing on me, just going hunting down these things. So and I try to make it interesting, too.
But he has a new idea for an addition to our show, which I think is looking to me like pretty entertaining. Let's see how it goes. Want to talk about it?
Well, let me first explain it. That's exactly what the feature is going to be. It arises out of a phrase. It arises out of a couple things that I've noticed over the past couple years that Republicans do when they're being interviewed and when they're on TV, and especially the pundits that are on the Republican news channel. They refer to, for example, the Democrat Party. Now, everybody who's been to school knows it's the Democratic Party, and it's just a little poke in the eye. It's a pain in the neck, and most Democrats try to ignore it, but they insist on doing it because that's just what that's what Republicans are. It takes a little something to differentiate a Republican from a Democrat, and one of the things is that they like poking people in the eye with little things like that. But there's another phrase that these same group of people use, these Republicans and Republican commentators, especially the commentators, the pundits, and I actually find it kind of disgusting. Not that I'm offended that I might be called this name, but the reference I think is disgusting, and that's the term libtard. Now, I'm a liberal. I've been a liberal my whole life, even when it was unfashionable, and we came up with this term progressive, which I come from before the term progressive, when liberal was liberal, and I'm very happy that I've lived long enough to see the Democratic Party coming toward me in the direction that I have always thought America should go in, and I've been pretty consistent, and I've had to put up with a lot of adversity and that kind of thing. But so I understand, libtard. They're trying to say that liberals are just, I don't know, not as bright as Republicans maybe, but it's this tard thing, and I think I'm not even going to utter the term that it's coming from because it's gross and disgusting, and
I think
many
we can all figure out what it is.
And many years ago, most civilized human beings realized how gross and disgusting that term was, that schoolyard term that you used to use to belittle people, and also at the same time disparaging people who, through no fault of their own, suffer disabilities. I hate that term, and I especially hate the idea that the Republicans think it's okay to graft a portion of that onto their little cute little phrase, libtard. So now I can imagine if there are any Republicans watching this show, and there may not be because it would enlighten them and they don't like that, it would hurt their head. But if they are watching, they're probably rolling on the floor laughing. They got under my skin, which is why they do it. So, okay, a little bit. You know, I'm not embarrassed of that because I really kind of think it's gross and disgusting. So, long story, right? Farley gets talking and he can't shut up. I want to co-opt that terminology. One more point to make. Remember that negotiation that we saw on TV where Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, after the election, but prior to her becoming Speaker, went in and tried to negotiate on the wall funding that ultimately led to the shutdown and the total failure on the part of Trump to accomplish anything. Remember when he tried to, the phrase is mansplain to Nancy Pelosi, that he understood she couldn't really be too aggressive because she was weak and might not get elected Speaker. Well, so I'm thinking about this idea of mansplaining, and I get that. I understand why women would be offended by that, and we saw a very good example of it. And I try to avoid doing it myself, although sometimes even I can't help it. So I'm going to take all of the things that I just talked about and kind of combine them into one feature, and I'm going to call it libsplaining. Okay? So I'm going to try to find a topic where the right wing, the Republican Party, it's not the right wing, it's the Republican Party and the people of the Republican Party and the Republican elected officials have gone off the rails. And I'm going to try to bring them back to earth and explain and libsplain to them that they're misunderstanding what the Democrats are trying to say. I've gone on far too long on this, but here's a very short, quick example.
Yeah, you're going to give us a little sample.
Very quick, short example. When AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, discussed her desire to increase marginal tax rates on the wealthy in order to collect more money and have the wealthy contribute more to their society and have more skin in the game. Trump TV went wild. She wants to tax everybody 70%. Well, no, we liberals know that what a marginal tax rate is, and that it's only on the last group of dollars that you make that the highest tax rate is applied, and on every
tax
dollar
all
below
your
that,
income at that.
It's not all taxed at that. So that would be an example of libsplaining. Here's another one. The Green New Deal, that isn't even out of the box yet. There's been all kinds of discussion about a summary that was released too early. It's not even here yet. It's premature. But the Fox TV is coming out and saying we're going to have to ban ice cream because dairy cows produce methane. Okay, let me libsplain that. No, it's not going to get rid of ice cream. Okay, that's simple. So that is the kind of thing that I'm going to do. When I see the Republican Party going crazy and mischaracterizing, I'm going to try to do a little libsplanation and see if we can bring them back to earth. And hopefully it'll be entertaining. Hopefully it'll be more positive, because I got to tell you that POTUS report was just getting negative, and I was getting tired of it. So that's the idea, folks. If you like it, post something on the Facebook page. Let us know. If you don't like it, tell me to shut up. I might listen.
And you can always call us right here at 640-3091 and tell us what you think about the new project of libsplaining, which I think is really intriguing.
Well, I might not have explained it all that well, but it was a first run.
I certainly think you did.
But I think we'll put something together, and hopefully it'll be entertaining and informative as well.
So, while we're waiting for Representative Cushing, who's a very busy guy, he's chairing a meeting. He's very active on finally getting New Hampshire to repeal the death penalty. He's been working on that for years and years as a survivor of a horrible, actually had two people in his family as victims of murder, including his own dad in Hampton. And another one down in the South, I think it was a brother-in-law. And yet he's become one of the most effective and passionate opponents of the death penalty. And the hearing on that is coming up in Representative Hall on February 19th. And there will certainly be a huge turnout for that. But in addition to that, he is championing many other good causes. And one that I just don't agree with, which is, as I started out by saying at the beginning of the show when we were introducing the show, is the idea that we should remove the final barrier and just legalize the sales of cannabis, marijuana, TCH, to adults in New Hampshire, at least in small amounts. And we had a show on that a couple of weeks ago, and I hope some of you out there saw that. We had the chief medical officer for CMC on that, and a woman who heads a group that's very concerned about that. And so this is the response to that. In the meantime, I had a hearing in our committee, which is Science, Technology, and Energy, yesterday on a bill to put up a commission to study the oncoming 5G. Now, we all have these devices, don't we? We all have these devices. I doubt there's anybody out there that's watching the show that doesn't have one of these devices. And these devices have gone from 1G to 2G to 3G, and this is 4G. And 5G is coming. G doesn't stand for gigabits or anything like that. It stands for generation. The 5G will be the fifth generation of these devices. And with that, when it gets here, and it's not really coming that fast, but it is coming, you'll be able to load down a whole movie on like seconds, if that's important to you, Netflix or whatever. But what I had never thought about, and what the presenters brought to us, was information about the health effects that these things can have, and particularly if we go to 5G with higher radio frequencies. I never thought about this, but apparently these devices, like our iPads and all kinds of devices, are constantly emitting radioactivity.
Your credit cards, your cars.
Your cars, your everything. We're surrounded by these things that emit radioactivity. And somebody made the point. Anybody remember the flip phone where you just flipped it up? Chances are it had a little antenna out here. Those antennas are gone. But they're not gone. They're just internal now.
Yeah.
They're all inside these devices. So 5G, when it comes, is going to be a lot of cellular towers. They won't be as big as the ones we see and generate fights in our towns. They'll be, about the size of a typical telephone pole. But we're going to need them by the batches. And each of these will be emitting this non-ionizing radiation.
What can you describe that, Bob? When you'd say radioactivity and non-ionizing radiation, is that the same radiation that comes from uranium, or
no?
Uranium, what are we talking about?
Uranium and the stuff that comes out of the stack at Seabrook and whenever there's an atomic bomb, that's ionizing radiation. We all understand that interferes, even at very low levels, with the operation of your cells at cellular level. And it was always thought that non-ionizing radiation, all that could do was heat you up. Your microwave is non-ionizing radiation. It cooks things for you just fine. But it now turns out that there is concern about non-ionizing radiation as well. And I didn't know this, but we had a fellow in the Technology Safe Association from Canada who used to be in this industry and said he's very concerned about it. And then we had a woman who came in as our final witness from New Hampshire, and she said that her son, 8 years old, had electrosensitivity. Now, I didn't know there was such a thing. I know we got to worry about, gluten-free and peanuts and all kinds of things are causing problems for some people. Some people have extreme sensitivity to this radiation, this non-ionizing radiation. And she had an extremely emotional testimony, but she said her son was just having a terrible time, couldn't sleep, had headaches, all kinds of hypertension, hyperactivity, not hypertension. And they finally moved into a home that was away from all these devices, and he was fine. And she said she herself has these problems. And I don't know how many people there are with this situation. This is brand new to me. Maybe somebody out there can talk to it. But it made me really concerned about this whole thing. Now, the industry, of course, says, nothing to worry about. It's non-ionizing. It only heats your skin, just like your microwave hits your food. But others say there's cause for real concern here, particularly with children. With children who don't have the same structure of protection around their brains that we do. Their skulls are not as thick, and their brains are sensitive and developing. In any event, after this presentation, I'm saying, and others have said, you want to answer your phone, don't put it to your head. Put it out here and put it on speakerphone. If you want to carry it, don't carry it next, because these things are always on, by the way, like so many of our devices. I mean, you can turn them off, but most of us keep them on all the time because who knows when the wives want to call once you go to the grocery store and get, some milk or some bread. So we always keep them on. Don't put them next to your skin. And so what I've taken to doing is, I always carry around this notepad. I always do. So I put this in the pocket and then put the phone on top of it. Now, I don't know whether that's going to be the protection I need, but it's something. So that to me was a real revelation of hearing.
Bob, what were the specifics? I mean, there's something wrong. There's cause for concern. What were the specifics? Has there been any medical testing of this? Non-industry medical testing? Or?
There's been testing on. There's been lab testing on rats, and they did find that the rats got more cancers and more tumors than the rats that were in the control group. And of course, they don't have these results for humans, but we're all experimenting with our own bodies with these devices.
Maybe
and the people that talked about this, they didn't seem to me kooks or crazy. As I say, one guy had been the head of the trade association for cell phones in Canada. He came down from Canada. The other was a professor at the university, at McGill University, and he spent a lot of time studying it. And there was a woman that came up from Massachusetts who has been working in legislatures across the state. And by the way, they say, these things are regulated by the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission. Not a health agency, folks. Not a health agency. And, of course, like most of our federal agencies, their major agenda is industry growth. Industry growth is good for government agency growth. See the Nuclear Regulatory Commission for another example. You think they're going to regulate nuclear power? No, not really. Not if it interferes with the growth of the industry, which actually isn't growing, but not because they didn't try. And the FCC says these things are safe, but they are not a health agency. And
so Bob, what was the purpose of the hearing before your committee? Is there a bill?
Is
there
a
a study bill, or is there a ban?
It's exactly
what
that. It's a commission bill to study this. Because when you get into it, there's going to be real problems about state regulation of these things. Mm-hmm. But Representative Patrick Abrami, who brought this to me, and by the way, he chaired the marijuana commission for the state in the legislature, and came out on the other side from Rennie Cushing on this. But in any event, he
well,
wants...
when you want to kill something, study it. I mean, you know that as well as I do, Bob. Jeepers.
No, I think study commissions can do things because they can unearth information that we
can kill
that
progress.
we need. And anyway, so I don't know. I have seen pictures of people who have, people really, really love to talk on their phones. They're talking like this and like this and like this. And then you see a tumor just in the exact same shape as the phone they were holding up to their...
Well, Bob, you're a man of science. You know that coincidence doesn't mean causation.
I do.
So...
But I think we need to more about it, which is why
let me ask this. Here's a question that you might be uniquely suited to answer, and I'm just bantering with you here because we got some air to fill, but wouldn't the trial bar be on to this?
Good question, and I don't know. The American Association for Justice having a breakfast tomorrow. I'll try and talk to somebody.
I would think that if this was a situation where we had recurring health issues, that maybe we're talking potential class action, or you certainly have some deep-pocketed potential defendants.
I think they did. There was some testimony about there's been some settlements on cases. I don't know. I really need to know more about that. And I'm not saying the case is totally, beyond a reasonable doubt on this. But I'm saying I think these folks did raise a cause for concern. And if you can do simple things like not putting these phones on onto your skin and keeping there for long times, why not do it? I mean, what's the harm? You could still have your phone and still talk to your friends. It may be a little problem for some of us that like our privacy to do it by using a speakerphone and keeping away from our ear. But, take just the simple precautions just in case there's some reality to this. That would be my message. And I think we need to know more about it.
Would it not be a better policy to remove the harmful instrumentality from commerce? Or improve it to the point where it was no longer harmful?
Well,
I mean, why is it on us to protect ourselves from the thing that they sell us?
Well, the United States has a very different attitude toward these things than
the civilized world. I know.
Europe does. In the United States, we allow chemicals to be introduced to the market or products, and without any testing about their safety, and we wait for complaints to arise. That's what we do. In Europe, there's much more tendency to say you got to prove your product is safe for normal use by consumers in the intended fashion before we're going to let you use it. But in the United States, and this is true, we're introducing new chemicals. I mean, look at the PFOAs down at the Merrimack. Look at any number of things, the MBTE.
Let's keep doing it that way then.
And
I guess
there was one outstanding example a long time ago when the United States was the one that caught the problem, and it was something called thalidomide.
Yes,
you remember that?
I do not, because I was not even born yet. But my mother certainly was of childbearing age during the time of the thalidomide babies,
Yep.
and certainly
Yeah.
I am aware of it. But it's time.
Well,
for us
that was the outstanding exception where Europe let thalidomide onto the market, and they ended up with many, many terrible birth problems with people with abnormalities of all kinds.
A lot of
and
missing
there was
limbs.
somebody in one of the American government agencies said, I think we need to look into this more, having seen some studies of animals. And that woman, it was a woman, I believe, gave the United States a real benefit by not following the example of Europe. Now it's flipped around. Now we're the ones that say, go ahead and market your stuff because we're all in favor of
Well,
commerce. But, it's just really something.
So what do you think? It's time for the first break? You want to regroup?
Well, that's what our director's telling us, and I'm happy to do it. I got another subject I'd like to go on if when we get back we haven't got Rennie with us. But I thought you might be interested in that, folks, and I'd be really interested in any of you have a reaction to what I've said. Is this just alarmism? Is this a bunch of scaredy cats, or is there something to it? I having heard these witnesses, I think there's some reason for concern. I really truly do. So we'll take a break and we'll come back.
Be back in a
very
minute
soon.
on another topic.
Hey, it's the Progress Report. This is our second segment. We hope you're enjoying what we've been offering so far, as we always do. Participation 640-3091. If you missed our intro, we are waiting and hoping for the arrival of Representative Rennie Cushing from Hampton to talk about why he believes we should go ahead and legalize marijuana for general sales, not just for medical reasons. And we are hoping to welcome him. Well, we have a caller.
We do. Why don't we take the call? We love our callers. John on line one.
Hey, John, welcome back.
Are you there, John?
Yes.
How are you? You're live on the air. What you got for us?
Oh, hi. Hi. I have a question, and I'm going to ask it and then hang up and listen to your response.
Oh, boy,
I was
a
wondering
test.
What you and Bob thought about the law that's on the books that holds people accountable for selling a lethal dose of any drug to a person. Okay.
A lethal dose of any
That
drug
it?
to a
Straight
person.
up? Want a couple of opinions on that? Oh,
Yes.
so
I'll just hang up and listen to your
okay,
response.
fine. Well, that's a question that kind of goes along with what our topic will be as soon as Rennie Cushing gets here, perhaps.
Yeah, I think maybe John's question was prompted by the fact, didn't somebody just get convicted and pretty drastically sentenced for selling
There's been
fentanyl?
there have been several
Fentanyl
convictions.
that caused the death of the user?
Yep, fentanyl
I think that
and
just,
heroin
just
sales.
happened here. If that's what John's thinking about, go ahead.
Well, an opinion. I think that we need to have an all-hands-on-deck approach to defeat this scourge. However, my basic fundamental policy thought is that you cannot criminalize your way out of addictive behavior. There has to be another approach. I certainly can understand that a person who sells or gives or otherwise distributes to another person a lethal dose of a chemical that's illegal should be held responsible for that, and more responsible than just selling the drug. The outcome is devastating. But I just don't know if this is the place where we should be focusing. Like I've said with regard to marijuana legislation, is this where we focus to solve a problem, or should it not be a more holistic approach with treatment and other ways to address the addiction problem?
And with that, we are happy to welcome Representative Rennie Cushing.
I want to thank you very much for the effort to come down here and be on this show.
Long, busy day in Concord,
Been a
I know.
long day in Concord.
He was in front of my committee and chairing his own committee and doing lots of really great things.
Finished up at 6:45.
How about
gosh,
that?
well,
And you got here in good time.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming down. We want to. This is kind of a balancing show. We previously had a show where we had two guests who were raising concerns about potential negative impacts on society of ending the prohibition on use of cannabis by adults. Their focus, one. I don't want to mischaracterize, but one thought there's not enough studies as to what the health impacts are. And of course, we know that's because studies were illegal. And the other person was a youth advocate who was very concerned about the message that's being sent to youth, and certainly both valid points. But I wanted to bring a little bit more balance to this discussion, so you were gracious enough to come down.
Well, thanks.
Maybe I'd be better to just serve it up to you and say, what's the pitch? Why is this a good policy?
Well, I grew up in Hampton, and when I was growing up, there were things that were considered social evils that were outlawed either by law or local regulation, although they happened to be things that were enjoyed by a large part of the population. Gambling, for instance, although there was a laundry at Hampton Beach where one didn't have to bring your laundry in, and you could get a laundry ticket. And when the Boston Daily Record came in, people would buy the Boston Daily Record and see the treasury balance and return to the laundry and collect a little bit of cash to spend at the beach. Intoxicating liquors were forbidden for sale in the town of Hampton. But there was a beer store over the Northampton line and down in Seabrook. And I remember as a kid going with my grandfather for a ride down to visit Dr. Green's in Seabrook, where he would get some prescription medicine, where it would get alcohol. But times have changed. What we used to call felony bookmaking, we now call Powerball. And I get lauded all over the place for contributing to education by purchasing a lottery ticket. And in my town, both tourists and residents can get a legal drink. And in fact, we are home of Smutty Nose Brewery, and the two largest grossing sale liquor stores are also in my community. And my point is that, things that were formerly forbidden, which a lot of resources were squandered upon, over time people have evolved to find that sometimes prohibition just doesn't work. And I think that's where we are. in the instance of cannabis. We're in a position now, I think, in the state of New Hampshire, where after 80 years of prohibition of cannabis, we have to come to the conclusion it failed. And I come to that from a criminal justice perspective. A decade ago, I was part of a justice reinvestment process that tried to look at what are we doing with our criminal justice system, and why do we have an escalating prison population? Seems like we couldn't buy our way out of it. And one of the things
we were building prisons and
we were
facilities.
building fast as we
yeah.
could. And one of the things we tried to take a look at is what are the things that were driving that. And I came to the conclusion, realization that one of the things that was driving the increased prison population was a failed war on drugs, and particularly failed war on marijuana. We're spending $35,000 a year to keep somebody in our jails, and at the same time, we're in a situation in our state where for every $1 we spend on college, we spend $1.50 on corrections, and that's not a sustainable model by anyone. It's to a tune of $120 million a year. So it was really looking at the failed war of prohibition that made me conclude that it was time for us to try something different. And I've been, part of an effort that's been underway for a long time in the state of New Hampshire. We certainly in New Hampshire, and in the prohibition against the use of cannabis for having medicinal purposes, it was akin to what happened when the prohibition of alcohol took place. I know that when alcohol was prohibited in this country, it still was considered medicine, and country doctors would often prescribe it, and you could go to a pharmacy and get that intoxicating spirit. To get those intoxicating spirits, and we've had a process where there's been recognized that there's some therapeutic value for cannabis, and so in 2013 the state of New Hampshire enacted a therapeutic cannabis program
For a specific subset of
for a subset
ailments.
for a subset of
Which has
ailments.
grown since
It's
then.
grown, and we're not in 28. Over 32 states now have some kind of therapeutic cannabis program.
And by the way, I want to fold that in, since we're in Manchester, that there's emerging research that says that cannabis may be of some assistance in the opioid situation as an alternative regimen for chronic pain.
I mean, I think contrary to what people have asserted, cannabis is not an entry, not a gateway drug. It's actually an exit drug. One of the things about our
What's the evidence of that, Rennie?
The evidence
I think
of that
that's
is
very controversial, that statement.
well. I mean, the evidence I get is by visiting the ATC, the Alternative Treatment Center in Merrimack, and talking to people who are there, who are themselves who speak directly about their experience, how the availability of cannabis has helped them get off as part of their recovery program. It's part of the opioid. It's part of rejection for
and yet
opioid.
it's my impression that the overwhelming majority of the first responders dealing with the opioid crisis do not feel that cannabis is an exit. They think it's an entry.
Well, I would disagree. Yeah, I don't know anecdotally that. I know that the states of Pennsylvania, I know that a number of states it is now recognized as a severe. It's certainly, I don't think anyone would argue the point that one thing that distinguishes cannabis from alcohol, from opioids, is that nobody ever overdoses on cannabis. It's just the nature of the substances, thus that you don't. Nobody's doing Narcan with that. And it provides an alternative. I think if you look at I work with certified recovery coaches who are the peer-to-peer, people who are in recovery, who themselves are the best allies, I think, for people who are struggling with addiction. And most of them say, most of them they believe in a harm reduction model. They think that the whole notion that we're going to, incarcerate our way out of the substance abuse program has a failed premise to it.
Yeah.
And yet that's what we seem to be, offered up.
When you offer the statistics about how much it costs to incarcerate somebody, which is no doubt about that, it's a very expensive way to treat individuals that we don't approve of their conduct, whether in the criminal code or not. But we're basically not incarcerating people anymore that are users of small amounts of cannabis, even on a regular basis. Those people aren't filling our prisons anymore, are they?
Well, they still are. I mean, I think it's it's a component
Even after
of
we
what
pass decriminalization?
Interestingly enough, even though after we we passed decriminalization. I mean, even decriminalization is kind of an interesting misnomer. If you get arrested with a marijuana cigarette these days, it's going to cost you $124. Well, it's interesting. It's cost you It's $128. It's going to cost you $62 if you're arrested for reckless driving. I mean, there's just certain inequities, and for whatever reasons, people are still being prosecuted for that. And I think the basis is...
Are they actually serving time, though? I don't think that's happening anymore.
Well, I think that cumulatively, but that's it's beside the point. It's still, the fact is that we're prosecuting, putting anybody in jail for using, a plant is just absurd. Part of that.
And there's more to it than just incarceration. There's also the record that carries with you and what that means for job applications and loan applications and everything else.
I mean, that one of the reasons I think that led to the legislature decriminalizing cannabis is the fact that it was recognized that the collateral damage that was done by the war on drugs is long lasted, lasting. And you see people. I mean, I still remember when Jeffrey Pendleton died in Valley Street Jail 4 years ago because he had he had a cigarette of marijuana in his pocket and couldn't make $100 bail, and 5 days later he's gone. I go to Stratford County. I go to Stratford County Jail and meet with women prisoners who are in the recovery program. It's interesting. I ask the question: is marijuana is a gateway drug? And they say no. I think what turned out being actually a gateway to serious addiction was interaction with the criminal justice system. That in and of itself ended up being, was such a traumatic and long-lasting.
That's the factor that makes the marijuana leading to the use of other drugs that they get within the prison system, within the criminal justice
system. And even
system.
today, when you have a system that the only place that you can access therapeutic cannabis, if your adult can access cannabis if they want it, is you have to go to a drug deal. It's anyone that thinks that there's no marijuana being used in the state of New Hampshire is just being, somewhat naive. And the people.
There are statistics on that, are there not? Among students and among adults. I mean, it's not insignificant. Let's put it that way. I don't know what the number is, but it's not insignificant.
I don't think it's insignificant. Again, one of the things that was always been difficult in even gaining baseline statistics is because of the prohibition on any kind of research when it came to cannabis. We don't have that. One of the things that our legislation does, but that will make the transition from prohibition to legalization, regulation, and taxation is that first thing off it takes funds to establish some baseline information, because in discussions with the other six. Well, at the time there's 6 states. Now there's 10 other states where cannabis has been moved from prohibition to legalization, regulation. They just pointed to the importance of having some baseline data to begin, assembling that as early as you can. And that's one of the things. So,
would you agree that if we legalize cannabis, there will be a big increase in use?
I wouldn't agree with that. I mean, I think statistically, if you take a look at the experience...
I mean, it seems like if you make the substance legal, a lot of people are deterred by it because it's illegal would now use it.
Again,
is the illegality really a deterrent? I mean,
I don't know that I assume the illegality is a deterrent. But the question is, I think that the bigger concern is, where will the big hit come? I think maybe the big hit will come to the liquor industry. And my perspective is that alcohol is a far more damaging drug than cannabis.
Alcohol causes plenty of damage, that's for sure, which to me is not an argument for legalizing another addictive drug.
But it is an argument for prohibiting it. I mean, I think I actually have more respect. I have a lot of respect for people who are consistent prohibitionists that that recognize that there's social evils associated with cannabis, think there's social evil associated with alcohol, and part of the discussion has been where we've had conversations with police who think that maybe we should try prohibition again.
Well, we've tried that, and we saw how that worked.
It did not work with alcohol. We all agree on that.
Let me ask this. You talked a little bit about taxation. We've seen what the taxation revenue can be in the experiment in other states. Yeah. How would that help the state of New Hampshire?
Well, I'll tell you at the outset, I'm concerned about getting rid of the underground, getting rid of the the underground economy. I
that's-
want to.
you said who takes the hit? They take the hit.
I want to get rid of the black market, which exists out there. I'm
My
actually more
understanding is
concerned
in the
about.
states that have legalized it, the black market has not gone away.
It has in some places. It's different, and it all depends on what the taxation rate. But one of the concerns is what do you find like the sweet spot? This is in many ways, we're seeing what market forces will do, and if you believe market forces in states in place where you have a prohibited tax, it leads to the underground. I think we can learn a lot from the transition that was made from the prohibition of alcohol to legalization of alcohol as we consider how we move from there. And that was an instance where was seen as a high priority that you wanted to get rid of the organized crime element, and you want to create if you have a product that you want to be able to sell at a price that people will pay the premium above the black market because it's legal, but I guess someone points out that if you offer somebody a TV for half price, sometimes somebody will want to look the other way with that. I don't want to encourage anything like that. But again, I think what's most important is to make the transition from being prohibited to have it available for recreational use for adults.
It's not going to be mandatory, right? We're not going to be making people use
not going to
this.
be mandatory. So I tell you,
That's ridiculous.
I learned. Yeah,
Nobody mandates use of alcohol either.
I grew up in Hampton was dry long after Manchester went wet, and it wasn't until 1971 that we allowed to say there's still towns in the state of New Hampshire, 3 towns in Coos County, where alcohol it's prohibited to be sold. And our legislation is. It's designed in the New Hampshire way to provide for local communities if they can, options to regulate it. They can prohibit it altogether. No one's going to be forced to do that.
If a town prohibits marijuana sale within its borders, would it get the tax benefits of marijuana sales statewide?
No, I mean the idea. Well, indirectly in that. Everyone will benefit when funds go into the general fund.
Because that's an issue in Massachusetts. A lot of towns are saying, no, we don't want the shops, but we want the money.
And that's what, the plan as we envision it would have funds go directly. We're concerned about trying to do property tax relief in the state.
So it would be a local tax?
We've allocated a portion of the fund to everybody, but there'd be some sweeteners that we expect. Sweetness to the local community that was host. They would they would have the ability to garner revenue from the licensing schemes, as well as the operations. We envision a cannabis control commission that what the legislation provides for that will promulgate a set of rules and regulations, will issue licenses for cultivators, for people who produce it, people who sell retail, people who transport, and also testing.
And
because
we
one
have
of the things
a lot of experience in that with our state liquor commission. New Hampshire can be proud of what we do with our liquor regulation. Is that not so?
Well, I think we can, although I will tell you that the proponents of the bill, we opted not to replicate the Liquor Commission because we thought there was there's always been this dynamic tension between regulation and promotion.
Running the stores.
Well, running the stores, but also there's been a lot of pressure because we made the Liquor Commission kind of an enterprise fund. There's the targets to generate revenue. And so the regulation component sometimes falls by the way. So what the Cannabis Control Commission that is provided for in the bill will do. It'll have kind of 2 functions. One would be an auditing or regulating function that would promulgate rules that will set up testing provisions, and then there'll be an enforcement arm akin to what the Liquor Commission enforcement is. But there won't be a promotion thing. We envision pretty strict controls on advertisements, on promotions.
We'll get addicted to the revenue. We'll promote the hell out of it.
Well, I don't know that. I mean, I don't.
We certainly did in liquor.
Well, we certainly did in liquor, so that's one of the reasons why we decided to separate the functions. We thought that we wanted to not have that same kind of addition.
Let me tell you about one of the things that's got me majorly concerned, and that is today's pot is not yesterday's pot. It's got much higher levels of TCH, which is the active ingredient that gets you high, which is why people use marijuana. They want to get high, unless they need it for medical reasons, which is another thing. We've already handled that. And so that's very concerning. I know your bill says that the commission can regulate the THC content of it, but won't the pressure be on to ratchet that up? And that's just a concern to me, really. And that plus the fact that the delivery systems are being made more attractive and all the time, candies, not just brownies anymore, and for adults, but kids get into it.
I mean, part of it is when you have an unregulated market, which we do now, is that people have no idea what it is they're getting. We have the idea of setting up an independent testing agency is we will track from seed to sale what it is. It'll be testing, so there'll be a determination, a standard weight, just as there's an ABV count for beer when you see the difference between a 4.0 or a 8.2. So you will have you will have a requirement for testing and labeling of the products, so that people will be able to understand what it is that they're consuming in a way that nobody really does now.
And by the way, all of the things, Bob, that you just mentioned as fears are all going on today, right now, as we speak, because it's not like there is no marijuana market in the state of New Hampshire, and it's going to explode on the day it opens.
I believe this will open up the gates to much increased use.
Where does that belief come from? It seems like it comes from your belly.
Because people tend not to do things that are illegal, and tend to do them more when they're legal.
Where does that belief come from?
Actually, it's interesting.
It comes from people who are law-abiding, by and large.
I think that's interesting.
I don't see it,
the experience particularly has been, one of the things is trying to treat this as I always say I want to make the transition from I want cannabis, I want marijuana out of the Criminal Justice Committee and into the Health and Human Services Committee and the Commerce Committee, because I think that's the way that we have to treat this product. And I think that the way that some of the fears that have not been realized in other states where it has been legalized is that there's no spike in consumption. The one area, actually, I will agree. The one area where you have seen increased consumption is in the population of people 65 and older. That's the one area of the demographic. It's been uniform across the other ways. And I mean, if you're 75 years old and you suddenly decide that you want to try a new spirit,
and I would postulate that that's the demographic that's going to be much more likely to be strictly law-abiding, because everybody under that age lived through the 60s and questions authority. It's just the way I think.
You live through the 60s. You're not that young anymore.
No, living fossils. No, I think one of the things. I mean, the one thing that's really clear is that the overwhelming demographic, the approval rate. I mean, 2/3 of the people of the state of New Hampshire, the UNH poll, support legalization, retail sales of marijuana, of cannabis
Shouldn't that
in the
be
states.
enough?
Well, but
not for me. I
not
believe in
necessarily.
representative democracy, not direct democracy.
But it also and that's a majority of the majority Republicans, but it is in the normal. It's like 93% on the demographic of 35 years of age or younger, and it's kind of interesting as we have discussions about how do we keep, how do we attract, how do we retain young people, and we need commuter rail. There are certain things that is the idea that you think that hanging out making the state slogan prohibition or die is going to be something that will be attractive to people who are young professionals who are able to, we're in a situation now, you want to go to Maine, New Hampshire, Maine, Massachusetts, Vermont, Quebec. We're surrounded by states where adult recreational use of cannabis is prohibited. We've got the governors of Rhode Island, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Illinois, all asking their legislatures to enact laws to move from prohibition to legalization and regulation. And a fifth of the country right now lives in states where adult recreation is. And the sky has not, I will just say the sky did not fall in Oregon. You have Governor Hickenlooper who will be coming here to the state because he has he might want to discuss future plans he had. He was someone who was completely against the legalization, the referendum, because it was passed not by the legislature in the initial states. It was passed by the people through a referendum.
That's why I don't like referendums.
And
policy.
And he has said that, Governor Hickenlooper said that all of his fears, none of his fears were realized. That it's turned out to be, a benign experiment. That if it's a side benefit, it's provided additional revenue.
Yeah, what's he going to say as the governor of Colorado wants to be president?
Well, let me ask you one more thing. As with any recreational activity, excess can lead to addiction and can be harmful.
Yeah.
I'm not in any means trying to deny that there may be people who suffer for one reason or another, as a result of this change in the law, it happens when any law is changed. I presume, and I'm going to ask you, does the law provide funding for treatment,
Absolutely.
For education, and all of those things? Can you talk a little bit about that?
No,
in order to keep kids away from
Absolutely,
it, in order to help people who might fall into a bit of a problem.
Well, there's a really stringent policy when it comes to children and the use of young people. We recognize that, but it also does things. It puts funds into the Department of Public Health for education across the board on substance use disorders. It also provides money for law enforcement so that they can be trained to do, recognition because we're, certainly impaired driving is a crime now. We want to make sure that we do an even better job of making sure that impaired driving is not encouraged. Like alcohol, there'll be like the equivalent open container. No one will be able to consume cannabis in a car. No one will be able to transfer cannabis to anyone who's under the age of 21. If you have it in your possession, you have to, it won't be able to be, we won't use it in public. It's some people call it somewhat of a puritanical regime and how we're going to approach it, but we think that it's just an approach that makes sense for the people of the state of New Hampshire.
And yet law enforcement is overwhelmingly against this, including our chief here in Manchester.
Law enforcement has always been, has been for the most part, but not unanimous. You look at
I didn't say unanimous, that overwhelming.
Right, and you look at and they just as they opposed the therapeutic cannabis program, just as they opposed decriminalization of responsible marijuana. But I don't think.
Well, I think their concern is they know how to try and test people for impaired driving due to alcohol. They're not sure how to do it with cannabis.
I see that as the biggest red herring ever dragged across a roadway.
It presumes that. I mean, again, that's true.
There's no designated field sobriety test. There's no.
And
why would it be any
test.
different? If touching your nose
and half the there are field tests that there's not a chemical test per se, but half the drug driving convictions in the state of New Hampshire take place without breath tests. I mean, it's not
anybody can have a right to demand one and get a more objective result. And this would not help if you're impaired driving due to cannabis high.
The impaired driving has not been a problem in other states that have done that.
Hey, I don't know about that.
Well,
we'll have to ask the people from there.
Well,
I would say
our
at the
statistics
very
are out.
least we ought to see these states have more experience before we go forward. And I would like to see more studies on long-term effects, particularly on young people, before we take this step.
Well,
And I know there's a bad reason why we don't have those studies. Doesn't matter. We don't have them.
Right.
So,
I find it extremely wrong for the federal government, and it's the federal government who's the culprit here, to prohibit testing and then take advantage of the fact that there are no tests. But you're not the federal government, so you certainly can
no,
make
I
that
want the
argument.
results of tests
Well,
before we take this step.
It's just interesting that you can, I live in Hampton, so I can go 10 miles to the south. I can be in Salisbury. I could, purchase adult recreational marijuana. I go 10 miles north. I'll be in Kittery, and I do that. And yet, someone who comes from Massachusetts and has a marijuana cigarette or and gives that to their spouse, that's a felony in the state of New Hampshire. I mean, giving away just any amount of cannabis to somebody else is considered a felony. It's really an inability to deal with, to embrace a harm reduction approach toward substances and substance abuse, and that's what I think.
So what's your prediction? We expect this to be coming before the House and the Senate, and we know the governor's going to veto it if it passes both chambers. Do you think you're going to be able to make this law if we need to override a gubernatorial veto?
Well, I don't know. I'm just trying to, it's before my committee. We had a very lengthy, all-day public hearing.
Yes, you did in Reps Hall.
In Reps Hall,
Quite
and
well
overwhelmingly, I would say that, again, when you have 3/4 of this, or 70, 2/3 of the state, anyhow, over that support retail sales when it's available every place else, I think certainly there's public opinions that way. Now, whether or not it'll translate into the legislature, because I will acknowledge, as you say, that law enforcement there's a fierce stand against it.
Why do you think that is?
I actually think it's an inability to. It's an inability to recognize that the damage that the war.
When you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Everything looks like a nail, I think, and just it's not even. But it's not everybody. It's law enforcement against prohibition. It's been, really important voices in that. Rick Van Wicklow over the sheriff, the jail in Cheshire County. There are law enforcement forces which the reality is. It is such a distraction at a time when we have an opioid crisis. It is just a distraction on that to think that we want to have people chasing down folks who are just sitting by themselves in the quiet of their homerooms, in their own homes, enjoying a plant that's been around for thousands of years. And I also think, quite frankly, there's this whole residual stuff at the basis of the prohibition of cannabis. It really is. It's racist.
We had that discussion on the other side of the issue.
Marijuana is Mary Jane. Why? Because it just represented all the. It's all the people who are coming that we need to build a wall for.
Yep,
It's those
right
people.
back in the same place.
And it's all about the people who gave us jazz. It's all about the others that somehow this is. This is a suspect, even though it's been around.
The supposed health issues and societal issues really, those I think were a subterfuge for the real purposes behind the marijuana prohibition.
Right. And then again, I think it's rather ironic that the manufacture of fentanyl was one of the largest contributors to the anti-pot legalization campaigns in other places.
Well, we have to support that.
Maybe not ironic, but I think. There's certain.
We should get behind that. I think fentanyl. Right. It's a good thing.
Well, I guess, but I do think it's a big distraction. The whole.
Well, we're almost at the end here, Rennie, and glad to have you here. Always great to see you. You got another big hearing come up on February 19th in Repsol. Right. You want to just make a quick statement about that?
No, I just think. Well, it's not to conflate the two issues, but there is a hearing on a bill that would repeal the death penalty in New Hampshire, and 185 years after Governor Badger first asked the legislature to repeal capital punishment, we'll be taking it up again. And last year the legislature voted to repeal it. The governor vetoed the bill. We were unable to override that. I think perhaps it's an issue that cuts across many traditional lines of.
Law enforcement is overwhelmingly opposed to repealing the death penalty, correct?
They are, but then
no,
again,
not so overwhelmingly as they are on marijuana. Some very fine police officers, former attorney generals that were presided over capital cases, very strongly supporting Rennie's position and my position,
right.
And we're the same on this, that we do not want to have the state executing people.
And my position at the same time.
And your position.
But I don't think that it's a clear distinction between law enforcement's support of prohibition of marijuana and law enforcement.
But I also, I don't like to pigeonhole people. I don't like to create, necessarily cast stereotypes on how one would feel on an individual issue. There are lots of reasons to, oppose the death penalty. From a libertarian perspective, some people, if you don't trust the government to plow snow and collect taxes, why would you want to give it the power to kill prisoners?
Sure.
There are people who are concerned, who have a consistent pro-life, womb to tomb perspective. That it's a moral issue. There are people who just see that, it's a failed policy, even if you think about it in theory that it might be good. But the way it ends up, it's a system that gets applied to the, here we have in New Hampshire, 2 people had capital trials. The millionaire and the young African American both get convicted. The millionaire's life without parole, the young African American guys get death penalty.
Yeah. Well, thanks for stopping in, Rennie. It's always a real pleasure to spend time with you anytime. And you do so much for the state of New Hampshire. I'm sorry to say I don't agree with you on this, but you're still my hero and always will be.
Well, we'll continue conversation.
We will.
We will.
Yeah, we will. Okay, well, folks, next week we'll be back and we'll have a representative of I believe the director of the Manchester Airport on. We're going to talk about
do the airport show.
We're going to do the airport show on time. What's happening with our Manchester Airport, where the passenger numbers keep going down year after year. What is the plan to get that straightened out and
legalize recreational marijuana?
Right, fly high to Manchester Airport. Okay, we'll see you next week, folks.
Thanks for watching, folks.
Take care.